Today I'm crawling through your screens that you're definitely not addicted to and can stop using anytime you want to cover the 2002 horror classic The Ring. Which not only means you'll be hearing way too many stupid Ring puns from me today, but also means I'll be giving you my pretentious little pitch for why I think this movie is, at least to some measure, about technology and the darker side of its spread. And how, for some reason, most people tend not to dive into this aspect of the movie when analyzing it. Because now, all these years later, the subtext feels all the more hauntingly relevant to the technologically anxious culture we live in today. So let's not talk about The Ring 2, because it contains this shot, and this shot. And let's not talk too much about the original Japanese movie Ringu, or the many novels and sequels in its larger franchise, because I don't feel like it, and I'm not even gonna show you footage from the 2017 soft reboot Rings, because if ever there was a movie that will result in imminent death after watching it. And instead, let's talk about The Ring, and how the ideas behind a movie can become even more potent over 20 years after its release. But first... The Ring follows a young lady named Katie, who... Okay, she's dead. The Ring follows Katie's Aunt Rachel.
Hey.
Who has no time to discuss her son Aidan's pretentious cry for help drawings.
He'll be okay.
Because now it's time to take the creepy little turd to his cousin Katie's funeral, where Rachel finds that her niece had a bad habit of dying 7 days after watching a naughty videotape that wasn't approved by the MPAA. So Rachel investigates the videotape because she's a journalist and can really use the clickbait. So after arriving at the cabin in the sketchy woods, where Katie and the rest of her smudgy-faced friends watched the videotape that ended their sad, smudgy-faced lives, Rachel finds said videotape and watches it, only to discover that it's totally boring and has no plot.
There is no harmony in the universe. The trees here are in misery. The birds are in misery. Overwhelming misery and overwhelming fornication.
But thankfully a ghost calls right after to give her movie an interesting plot by telling her she's gonna die in 7 days.
7 days.
So Rachel sticks the cursed videotape where it belongs, right in front of her ex-boyfriend's face. But this is no normal ex-boyfriend. This is Noah, the ex-boyfriend who impregnated her with the second coming of the devil before singing Sayonara. It's all good in the green-tinted hood though, because Rachel still thinks he cute though. So she creates a copy of the tape and does investigative fingering with Noah before telling him like it is.
Grow up!
After doing disgusting clown tricks, and finding a gross dead girl peeing on her floor, Rachel realizes cursed videotapes are the future of psychedelic nightmare trips, before discovering Aidan really is autistic because he actually likes art house films.
Why, baby, why? Why?
With her son now on the 7-day diet too, Rachel makes like Gandalf with the research on why this evil videotape exists, especially since DVDs had been around for like 5 years now, which leads Rachel to Anna Morgan, the main character in the snob film who went insane before taking her own life with a mid-somersault. Probably because nobody liked her snob film. So after pissing off a horse and destroying a little girl's childhood, Rachel arrives at the Morgan Ranch where Anna Morgan's husband, Richard Morgan, is sick and tired of being asked questions about his adopted daughter who mysteriously disappeared after driving his wife crazy with her mutant psychic powers. So he makes like Professor X with a janky cerebro and dies in an attempt to bore the images out.
In an attempt to bore the images out.
But nobody cares because it's Rachel's happy 7th day and she's gonna die but she doesn't want to. So she and Noah unlock some savory secret origin sauce on the dead girl who peed all over her floor, less commonly known as Samara, the Morgan's adopted little turd with telepathy powers, which leads Rachel and her clingy ex to a well of knowledge with nothing in it. So Rachel takes a little dip and finds that Samara is nothing but bones in a really manipulative victim story. One in which her mother terminated her at 417 weeks because kids with telepathic powers show you the darndest things. Assuming she must have made like Britney's fan base and helped set the poor girl free after all these years, Rachel goes home to enjoy a happy ending with her son. But Aidan reminds her that this isn't the Conjuring franchise.
Don't you understand, Rachel? She never sleeps.
So Samara shows her soggy wet self into Noah's apartment and kills him in a scene that made every millennial wet their bed. which causes Rachel to realize she actually didn't survive because she has main character plot armor. She survived because she made a copy of Samara's pompous art film and showed it to someone else. So she teaches young Aidan how to perpetuate the cycle of pretentious horseshit filmmaking before contemplating who her next boyfriend/victim will be. If we're going to take a look at the techno-horror of The Ring in the context of the now, we should start by taking a look at it in the context of the then. The then being 2002, and 2002 being a time when I was but a bright-eyed young boy of 11 years age. I so vividly recall that day my parents let me out of my cage to see The Ring with them, running around that theater lobby as far as my leash could extend. The first time I saw Samara's handsome troll face, like seeing a reflection of my own handsome troll soul. You see, The Ring isn't about you. It's about me. It's no mystery that both The Ring and its Japanese predecessor Ringu play within a technological sandbox given their shared story premise. And from what I understand, the series of books that both movies owe their existence to contain their own subtextual commentary on technology. But if you'd like to hear more about that, you'll have to find you a YouTuber that reads good. While Ringu uses the technology of its time solely as a modernized narrative device for its long-haired weirdo to travel from the evil spirit world to our evil regular world, the remake takes that same narrative device and expands it into some scrumptiously horrifying techno subtext. I think it's quite apparent that The Ring intended to say some kind of something about our cultural fears surrounding technology. And this is because the evidence is just too electric. Many of the key changes The Ring makes in adapting Ringu come with a taste for the technological. There's the fact that Noah is a photographer/tech nerd who lives in a gigantic tech-laden apartment, while his Ringu doppelganger character is just a regular professor nerd who isn't about that tech life at all. Then there's Samara's father, Richard, who may as well be a wholly original character compared to the father of the gross-haired girl in Ringu, and his shocking suicide is not so subtly owed to his friends at Circuit City. On top of all this, and especially if you're keeping an eye out for it, there's a general all-around doubling down on technological visual showcasing throughout The Ring versus Ringu. But before we get all deep and angsty about what that all means, let's first dip into a little analysis on the more immediate ideas being transmitted through this movie so we can connect all the puzzle pieces just right.
I made a copy.
At its most straightforward, The Ring is about two estranged parents learning to grow up in a sense and take responsibility for the neglected child between them. Rachel is presented as a career-driven single mother who certainly loves her kid, but as the first scene shows, is pretty quick to write off signs that he's reaching out with some disturbing shit to get out of his mind.
You say she died 3 nights ago. Aidan drew these last week.
In the world of the story, this is quite literal, of course. Aidan has at least a tinge of psychic sensibilities, making him a second-hand receiver for the curse Samara's spirit casts on his cousin and eventually him and his parents. Samara is essentially an extension of Aidan's neglect. She's the dark spirit at the center of it all, the abandoned child transmitting her own pain, loneliness, and lack of parental love to the also abnormal Aidan. She's an extension of Aidan's needs, the genre-rendered expression of a real-world notion, a troubled child wanting to be heard, wanting to have their confusing internal world recognized. And for some more atypical children like Aidan is presented as, which through a horror lens is basically a less murderous Damien type, those desires can get expressed in some pretty unsettling ways.
You have lots of time.
So you know when I'm going to die?
Aidan has a morbid fixation thanks to the secondhand frequencies of Samara's curse. His existential obsession is confounding to Rachel, as most kids tend not to ponder their own mortality, or call their mother by their first name.
I met Rachel.
So when Rachel receives her death warrant and is burdened with the knowledge of the very limited time she has left, she's on something of a journey of understanding her own son's psychology. Her investigation leads her to a story of the darkest outcome to a child's cry for attention, of two parents unable to accept the challenge of tending to their unusual child, driven mad until they cross the worst line a parent can cross. Rachel is realizing the darkness that can spread from a child not receiving the attention they require.
Daddy loves the horses. He wants me to go away.
And that lack of love can have a corrupting chain effect, reaching far beyond where the neglect initially occurred. There's a dark, grayish-greenish saturation to the movie, a lack of life and light, a feeling of loss and a haunted, unreleased spirit of solitude like a shadow over this world. Water, typically used to convey innocence, can be so often seen and heard falling and thrashing heavily throughout, often when a TV is nearby, or eerily leaking, uncontained. Anna Morgan dies by jumping into the angry ocean tides, while Richard Morgan offs himself in the also angry bathtub tides. Then there's the island doctor who tells Rachel that ever since Samara disappeared, the psychic disruption she caused in the minds of the locals has gone away. The river and the backdrop of the scene shown quiet and calm. But there's still a lingering eeriness to it, as if this is only the eye of the storm, before Samara's retaliation reaches them all once again. Water not only representing the angry vengeance of Samara's spirit, a disruption of innocence, but also a sort of rebirth for Rachel in the climax. The ring, at least in one sense, represents the ring of shut-out light Samara saw above as she slowly decayed. Like a never-ending cycle, one might even say an Ouroboros.
You said who and what now?
Samara's mission in death is to force everyone to feel the same dread she experienced, the nightmare she had to live for 7 agonizing days, all because her parents rejected her as she is. Rachel making contact with Samara's spirit and learning of her sad secret origin is something of a birthing process for her, into maturing as a parent, learning to listen and understand her child's needs.
How could she have done that? She just wanted to be heard. Sometimes children, they howl or cry or draw pictures.
Noah, the man-boy wonder who skipped out on his baggy-eyed boy's life, also comes to this realization, motivating them both to mend their broken family in the name of giving their son and themselves a more fulfilling existence. Only, it's a sham. Rachel thinks she's broken the cycle, restored time and understanding to what infected her family, but truthfully, she only gets to go on because she helped perpetuate the dark cycle. The ending in this regard conveys the notion of it's too late for betterment and healing. The curse doesn't grant life to those who find understanding and empathy. It only grants life to those who help extend the cycle of trauma to others.
It's going to keep going, isn't it? She'll never stop.
And while this twist probably lends itself more to just being a cold and all-around badass note to end a horror movie on, more than making a deliberate statement on the parenting and child neglect angle, the technological reading of the movie is where this twist really provides the profound goosebumps. "... 2002 wasn't only the first time I was allowed to see daylight, The Ring. It was also a time when humanity was entering into a profound new technological era.
The iPod, this amazing new digital hub device. We stocked out in several places in the US. So we're building even more, and we are not going to stop.
In many ways, 22 years later, even given how far we've advanced technologically since then, there's a similar intuition that the truly life-altering developments are still on the horizon. Only now, there's a thicker air of dread accompanying our collective conversation over where technology is taking us. And it makes the techno-horror of The Ring feel all the more on the bloody nose than it even did back then. The premise of the movie conveys a sense of our technology turning on us, a mysterious but alluring ghost in the machine, a monster within what we created, and a deep, primal knowing telling us to keep away. Yet our curiosity can't help but engage, casting us into fear and confusion, threatening to leave us lifeless if we refuse to take part in its ever-increasing expansion. And the movie's tone and visuals only accentuate these sentiments with washed-out, mournful expressions of solitude throughout. Technology equating to isolation and disconnect really does appear to be a key dimension to The Ring. Noah escapes from being a father in his child's life to a fortress of techno-solitude, buried in his tech-obsessed photojournalism job.
Can you pretend for 1 minute that I don't read Video Geek magazine?
Perhaps the most notable visual display is in the prolonged moment where Rachel peers into the opposing skyrise apartment windows from her balcony. Having just exposed Noah to the cursed tape, she observes various residents in their confined little boxes, a melancholy accompanying the common theme of them all: solitude and television. The camera moves us from one example to the next in a circular manner, until it arrives where it started, at a somber-looking single mother, her child left alone with the TV. This all conveying a never-ending cycle of isolation and technology, a curse that already had us in its clutches. I'm personally convinced that this inspired a very similar scene found in It Follows, the 2015 horror movie that I've covered on this here channel, and that no doubt was a result of the curse-spreading plot device The Ring popularized in the genre. The It Follows scene in question has us also peeking through windows, the camera moving in a circular direction as well. Here it's to convey the cycle of human reproduction, because this movie is about a potato-baking demon that tries to kill those who bake infected potatoes. Still, it's quite interesting to notice the influence The Ring has had over the years, not only in the curse subgenre, but in conveying the horror and the cycles humankind finds itself unwittingly trapped in. But back to that single mother eye-dogging our protagonist. This also connects back to the neglected child read too, because in this movie the metaphors go bounce off each other. Not unlike a more recent techno-horror movie, Megan, there's a dash of the dangers of letting our children be raised by technology in The Ring as well. Doomed opening prologue girl Katie watches and dies from the cursed tape along with her boyfriend and friends. And the grief-stricken parents are unaware that it's all because their kids dabbled with the dark and technological in secret. Just as well, little Aidan gets his hands on the cursed tape while Rachel is too busy with her own existential techno troubles, leaving old Bug Eyes infected by images he never should have seen on the telly. There's certainly a media influencing the minds of the youth branch we can follow from here too, but all in good time, because the unstoppable entity of this movie is Samara. And Samara not only equals neglected child, she also equals technology. Particularly by the end, we come to realize she's less of an actual character and more of a force of nature. Or more accurately, a disruption of nature. One that could really use a towel. Not long before her short life ended, she was exiled to a tiny barn loft by her father for scrambling her mother's brains, as children do. She was left alone, imprisoned in solitude, with nothing but a television set to occupy her. Her only medium of connection to the outside world. So after death, Samara terrorizing humanity through this device is no coincidence, extending her nightmare of being confined in front of that screen, cut off from any genuine human connection. It's also interesting to note that the island the Morgans raised Samara on has an old-fashioned, pre-electronics era feel to it. Every corner of the island we see Rachel investigating consists of people working physical labor jobs, or in the local psychologist's case, with unmediated human-to-human connection. Samara's out-of-control telekinetic powers also caused the Morgan Ranch horses to go crazy and drown themselves. With the Samara as technology read, she's disrupting nature, turning it mad, driving it away to its death. Before the final moments of the movie, when we get our Samara sympathy goggles ripped off our ignorant faces,
Ow!
We may consider that if only the Morgans and the rest of the island villagers tended to Samara, accepted her as she is, and integrated her, perhaps they could have coexisted peacefully. But in the end, we find that the villagers were right to fear Samara. She's revealed as a monster with no interest in coexistence.
Those people mess with nature.
What do you mean mess with nature?
Only wanting to spread and consume.
I wasn't a normal little girl.
Until all are living her nightmare. Back to that media influencing the minds of the youth branch. The first sound we hear in the movie is pouring rain, followed by Katie saying to her bestie Becca,
I hate television. I heard there's so many magnetic waves traveling through the air because of TV and telephones that we're losing like 10 times as many brain cells as we're supposed to. All the molecules in our heads are all unstable. All the companies know about it, but they're not doing anything about it. A big conspiracy.
Now, back in 2002, this notion of the screens we're watching having dangerous effects on the minds of the population, particularly the youth, held a certain amount of cultural weight, but wasn't quite the cause for worry it's become today. Though the girls are watching television commercials during this opening monologue, which we could decipher as a commentary on the negative influence of advertising companies, on the manipulation tactics they use, transmitting through screens in our homes the promise of happiness if only we buy their products and keep them rich.
Advertising is based on one thing: happiness. Happiness is the smell of a new car.
This particular angle was a topical concern for some time by 2002.
The commercials just keep coming. Pretty soon it's like one of those paintings where you're always going up the stairs, but sometimes you're actually going down the stairs and all you can think is, where's my Pepsi, you bitch?
So we can perhaps see this as the horror that lies behind the screens we watch, metaphor the movie was hitting on. Yet if we interpret Katie talking of corporate conspiracies and dangerous frequencies as something more along the lines of too much TV causes brain rot, or children watching too much sex and violence on TV can be harmful.
Do you ever worry that they're playing too much Nintendo?
Oh, not anymore. See, Matt has Bible adventures. They're actually learning Bible stories while they're playing Nintendo.
Quick, get that Bible quote.
Well then, there was certainly a charged mainstream backlash against this particular notion around this time.
I think it's easy to throw my face on a TV because I'm sort of a poster boy for fear, because I do and say what I want.
Children learn from media. Every day, more children are exposed and at risk.
Our show and the humor is almost defined by the limits of what you can do or can't do on TV.
Yes, it is my hope that every beautiful child on this earth has AIDS by next month. AIDS for everyone!
And exposure to sexual content increases the likelihood that children will become sexually active earlier in life.
The PMRC and everybody wants to come in, they want to step in and say, oh, this is right, but this ain't right, you know what I'm saying? And I feel like, especially today, kids are way smarter than we give them credit for.
Exposure to coarse language and disrespectful attitudes will also negatively affect children.
Everybody's f***ing seen it. Eric! I'm sorry, I can't help myself. That movie has warped my fragile little mind.
I think it's fair to say that the movie probably wasn't specifically latching onto any one of these various cultural concerns when it comes to its techno-horror. Instead, its premise was kept broad enough for us to reach any or all of these conclusions regarding television and media influence. I'd say the main intention here was to give humanity's horror toes a little tickle by equating existentialism, solitude, and an unending infectious spread with our technology that was becoming increasingly more efficient and influential.
Trying to buy a little time.
Which is why I think watching this movie today adds a whole new dimension, a hauntingly prophetic feel, like a storm that was just beginning to form. Because now we're living in the thick of it. Now our collective worries over our hyper-efficient technology and the influence it can have over our minds and our health is less often thought of as a moral panic and more often accepted as a very real existential concern. The warping of our attention spans, algorithmic echo chambers, misinformation, social media and its influence, particularly on the youth, concerns over AI, deepfakes, the list goes on. And that melancholic solitude the movie is so defined by, it's more relevant than ever. The only difference we'd see in this scene today would be more screens, with even more content to keep us perpetually connected, yet cut off. In this sense, the ring on the screen feels more than ever like a metaphor for staring into a dark, bottomless void. And this falls in line with how the vastness of the internet is visually articulated in media today, at least when it comes to everything everywhere all at once. A modern movie that uses the multiverse to convey, among other things, that overwhelming feeling of too muchness, of having everything we could want right at our fingertips. And not unlike that ring of death that forces you to become aware of your inevitable death after looking at it, Everything Everywhere has its own nihilistic ring to it in the form of the everything bagel.
Because you see, when you really put everything on a bagel, it becomes this, the truth. Nothing matters.
The ring feels like a fitting reflection of this sentiment as well. But here, the ending doesn't want to give us a warm hug to make it all better. It wants to give us a wet hug. No. Samara is the answer to the mystery behind those terrible abstractions on the screen. And is there a more fitting image of the fruits of humanity's technological labors than that of a child sitting alone in front of a screen? Only there is no beating heart or sentimental understanding that can be found in Samara/technology. It wants only to infect and spread its cold disconnect, extinguish our life force. And today, as we view, share, and spread viral information, most of the time in complete solitude and in front of a screen, it's hard not to ponder how technology has shaped us and where it all leads. If 20 years has only made the Ring more relevant,
It's come out really wonderful, and we are not going to stop.
how much more relevant will another 20 years make it? This well, it seems, has no end in sight. The only thing we do know for sure is that its advancement will continue.
You don't want to hurt anyone.
Its spread is guaranteed.
But I do. And I'm sorry.
And, like it or not,
It won't stop.
we are all part of its ceaseless expansion.
It's going to keep going, isn't it? She'll never stop.